Hello everybody, I'm Kat, and I'm going to be talking about some of the books that I've recently read. Now, I uploaded a video like this, like a month ago, but I have since read 6 books, so I figured it was time to do another one. So the first book I'm going to be talking about is The Way You Make Me Feel by Maureen Gu. I actually read this book for the biannual bibliothon that happened in like mid-July, so that's how long ago I read this. This book follows this girl who ends up getting into a huge amount of trouble, and then she and her enemy have to work at her dad's food truck for the summer, and she realizes that her and her enemy aren't as different as she thought they were. When I initially read this book, I gave it 2 stars, but looking back on it, I would honestly give it 1.5. This book was a dumpster fire. It was horrible, and I did not like it at all whatsoever. The main character was so unlikable. She was extremely immature for her living situation, but somehow she continued to act this same way throughout the entire novel. And she was also really angry all the time. Like, what was up with that? Why was she so angry? And don't even get me started on her internal monologue. Her thought process and the thoughts that she had were just so cringy. It made this book unbearable to read. The main character's enemy in this book is a literal duplicate copy of the main character, except her enemy is more mature and a lot more studious. The dad was also extremely 2D despite knowing his backstory. Like, that was really interesting because we knew so much about him, yet he was just so flat. Her mom was flatter than the pages in this book, and the love interest wasn't fleshed out at all. The plot wasn't introduced until page 134. Yeah, it took that long. And it was so predictable, you could basically see what was happening on page 1, which is what I did. The most redeeming part about this book was the fact that it takes place in Los Angeles, and I love LA, so that was the only part of this book that I enjoyed at all. This book really wasn't for me. I hated the main character, and I found the plot to be mediocre at best. It makes me really hesitant to read the author's other books because this book was just so cringy, and I've heard that her other book is also kind of cringy. The next book I read was Ramona Blue by Julie Murphy, and I adored this book. This book was so heartbreakingly beautiful. Like, that's literally the 2 words I would choose to describe it because it was so heartbreaking and so beautiful, and I adored it. I wasn't expecting a whole lot going into this book because I'd heard mixed things about it, and keep in mind that this is the first Julie Murphy novel that I have ever read, and I loved it. I freaking loved it. It absolutely blew me away. Though the first 100 to 150 pages moved kind of slowly, the last 2/3 of the novel just blew me away, and this novel was absolutely fantastic. I loved Ramona, and I loved her friend group, and I loved the fact that they were all so different, yet this one town that they live in is the one thing that brought them all together, and I loved that. This book is a lot more realistic than most YA contemporaries, and I am so glad I've read it because it is a new favorite of mine. It's one of my favorite books of the year. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. The next book I read was Heist Society by Ally Carter. I finally read it. Sadly though, this book is not my favorite Ally Carter book. Everything about this book was fine. I really liked Kat, and I liked Tale, and I liked the idea of a heist plot, and I really wanted to love it more than I did. The one thing about this book that just didn't work for me was the slow-moving plot. It wasn't as high stakes as Ally Carter's other novels, and it moved extremely slowly. The audiobook wasn't that good either. The narrator had this horrible monotone voice. Siri sounds less monotone than the audiobook. Like, that's how bad it was. I will be continuing this series because when I read the first Gallagher Girl novel, I was not a huge fan of it, but I grew to love the series with each and every book, so I'm hoping that this series will do the same thing. But I gave this book 3.5 out of 5 stars. So now we're getting into the books I read for Booktubeathon, and this next book I'm just so excited to talk about because, like, no one I know has read this book or has been talking about it, so I just want to throw this in everyone's face right now, and that is The Brightsiders by Jen Wilde. I adore this book so much, and I will get into more in like my thoughts later, but let me tell you what this is about first. This book is about this girl named Emmy, and she is the drummer in this band called the Brightsiders. One night after kind of hanging out with other members of the band and some other friends that Emmy has, she gets caught in a car accident by the paparazzi, and suddenly she is thrown into a clickbait scandal. I adored this book so much. I'm so surprised that I enjoyed it as much as I did. In reality, this book is more of a 4-star, maybe even 3.5-star book. I just had so much fun while reading it that I had to give it 5 stars. I loved Emmy and I loved Alfie, and whenever his name was mentioned, I'd think of Alfie's song by Bleachers. So that was fun. And I loved the fact that it took place in LA, and I loved the band element, and it was also really fun to see the characters from Queens of Geek appear in it. This book was kind of like a combination of Becky Albertalli's books with kind of elements of the fun you have while watching The Kissing Booth. The Kissing Booth, if you've watched it, you know, like, it's not the best movie out there, but it's just so much fun. And so this book was like Becky Albertalli meets The Kissing Booth. It was so adorable and I loved it. And the last 2 books I'm going to talk about are the other 2 books I read for the Booktubeathon, and that is Paper Girls Volume 3, as well as the Clueless Senior Year graphic novel. So I finally read the 3rd volume of the Paper Girls series, and I loved it so much. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. A new favorite of mine. With each and every volume in this series, the character development just blows me away every single time. And the artwork is absolutely stunning. Like, I don't really want to show you much. And the last book I'm going to talk about today is the Clueless Senior Year graphic novel. This book takes place a year after the events of Clueless, and it follows Cher and her friends from the summer after the movie takes place up until her senior year ends. I wasn't a huge fan of this one. The characters just didn't act like themselves in it, and I was not a fan of that. And some of the plot lines never came full circle, so we'd talk about one thing for like a while and then it would never reappear. Like I said, I gave it 3.5 stars. I absolutely adore the artwork in it though. Sadly, this book wasn't for me plot-wise or character-wise, which was surprising because I really loved the movie Clueless. Alright, and that is it for this wrap-up. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books, because I would love to hear your thoughts on them. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Make sure to click the bell icon so you're notified whenever I post a new video, and I post videos every Thursday, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!